Naomi Carter had learned to fear many things in her 29 years of life. Dark streets where shadows moved with intention. Raised voices that preceded violence. Unpaid bills that accumulated like prison sentences. Closed doors that refused to open no matter how hard she knocked or how desperately she pleaded. But nothing. Absolutely nothing terrified her more than the sound she heard that night. Her youngest son's stomach growling in the suffocating silence. The apartment was almost empty now, stripped bare by circumstance and desperation. No furniture remained except what couldn't be sold or carried. No refrigerator hummed its familiar background music. No television provided distraction or escape from reality. Just for thin blankets spread across the cold floor like abandoned islands, and a single flickering light bulb above them that seemed ready to give up at any moment, surrendering to the darkness that pressed against every window. Naomi sat against the wall, her back pressed against peeling paint, knees pulled tight to her chest, listening to the sounds of suffering she had caused simply by existing, by failing, by not being enough. Her 3 boys were trying to sleep, trying so hard it broke something fundamental inside her. The 5-year-old pressed his face into Naomi's arm, his small body trembling from hunger that had moved beyond discomfort into actual pain. His breathing came in shallow, uncertain rhythms, as if even his lungs had forgotten how to work properly without fuel. The 80-year-old stared at the ceiling with eyes that reflected the dying light bulb, pretending to count cracks in the plaster so he wouldn't cry, so he wouldn't add his tears to his mother's burden. The 12-year-old lay perfectly still, unnaturally motionless for a child his age. He didn't move at all. He had learned too early, far too early, that silence was a kind of protection, that invisibility might equal safety. But taking up less space meant causing fewer problems. Naomi's chest burned with shame so intense. It felt like her ribcage was collapsing inward. She had stretched the last can of beans hours ago, spooning it out with surgical precision, divided it carefully among 3 bowls, counting every kidney bean like precious stones. Too carefully, with mathematical desperation, she told them it was enough. Her voice bright with false confidence. She told them tomorrow would be better, painting pictures of meals that existed only in her imagination. But her body knew the truth that her mouth refused to speak. Tomorrow had been better for too many days in a row. The lie was wearing thin, transparent, obvious, even to children who wanted desperately to believe it. Outside their thin walls, sirens cut through the night like knives through fabric. Baltimore never slept, never rested, never showed mercy. Violence echoed in the distance like a constant warning, a soundtrack to survival. You are not safe here. You never were. You never will be. Naomi closed her eyes against tears that came anyway and forced herself to remember who she used to be before everything fell apart. A woman with plans that extended beyond next week. A woman with hope that wasn't attached to lottery tickets and miracles. A woman who believed love was permanent, that promises meant something, that vows lasted longer than convenience. Her husband had promised stability with his smooth words and confident smile. Protection from exactly this kind of suffering. A future where their children wouldn't know hunger, wouldn't understand eviction, wouldn't learn fear as their first language. Instead, he vanished into the night, without explanation or apology, left behind debt collectors who didn't care about his absence. Threats scribbled on paper in angry handwriting, knocks at the door that came too hard and too late at night, fists pounding like judgments being delivered. And now, as the final insult, the ultimate betrayal, hunger. Real hunger. Persistent hunger. The kind that didn't just hurt the stomach but crushed dignity, destroyed pride, made you less than human in your own eyes. The kind that doesn't announce itself with dramatic flourish but arrives quietly, persistently, relentlessly until suddenly you realize your children's faces have changed shape. Their eyes have grown larger in shrunken faces. Their clothes hang differently on bodies that are consuming themselves for fuel. Naomi pressed her hand hard against her mouth to physically stop herself from sobbing, from making sounds that would wake her children and add fear to their hunger. She could face eviction notices taped to doors. She could face prejudice from caseworkers and employers who saw her skin color and family structure and made instant judgments. She could even face the paralyzing fear that followed her through every dark street and uncertain moment. But watching her children starve, watching their bodies slowly consume themselves, seeing them pretend not to be hungry to make her feel better, that was something no mother was built to survive with her sanity intact. She whispered into the darkness, her voice barely more than breath moving across dry lips. I'm still here. I'm still trying. I haven't given up. But even she wasn't sure if the night believed her anymore, or if she even believed herself. Morning arrived without mercy. Not with sunlight, just a gray sky pressing down on the city like a physical weight. I stood in line outside a small corner grocery, my coat too thin for the biting wind. My hands weren't shaking from the cold, but from the desperation that had settled deep in my bones. I counted the coins in my palm again. Still not enough. The cashier didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the register screen, as if looking at me might contaminate him. He'd already decided who I was. A young black woman, 3 kids clinging to my legs, no husband, no money. A story he thought he already knew. I turned away before the tears could fall and give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Outside, my oldest son waited with his brothers, his small shoulders pulled back, pretending to be strong, pretending to be a grown-up when he should just be a kid. I hated that most of all, that theft of childhood, that loss of innocence that could never be replaced. I walked for hours that day. Food banks, with lines wrapped around buildings. Churches, with locked doors. Community centers with waiting lists and eligibility requirements that felt impossible. Come back next week. We're completely out of supplies. You need documentation, proof of address, birth certificates. As if hunger cared about bureaucracy. As if my children's empty stomachs could wait for forms to be processed. By afternoon, my legs ached. My head throbbed. My hope felt thinner than the soles of my shoes. We sat on a bus bench. The boys leaning against me. Too quiet. That's when I noticed the stares. Not curious. Not sympathetic. Judgmental. A well-dressed woman clutched her purse tighter as she hurried past. A man in a suit shook his head in disgust. I heard whispers of welfare and shouldn't have floating on the cold air, but I lifted my chin. It was a small act of defiance. I've learned something in these brutal weeks of survival. If the world is going to look down on me, they will see me standing tall. They can question my worth, but I won't. They can doubt my strength, but I know it intimately. They can try to make me invisible, but I refuse to disappear. That night, after another failed day, I made a choice, a dangerous one. One that might cost me the last shreds of the person I used to be. I would not let hunger win. If dignity had to bend so my children could eat, so be it. But I would never let our circumstances break me completely. As the city lights flickered on, I held my boys close in our nearly empty apartment. I whispered words that felt more like a prayer than a promise. This is not the end of our story. This is just one chapter. We're going to survive this, and someday we'll tell this story from the other side of it. The knock came just after sunset. In that uncertain hour when day surrendered to night. Sharp. Urgent. Deliberate. Too familiar in its aggression. Naomi's body stiffened instantly, muscles locking, breath catching. Her children froze mid-movement, like animals sensing a predator. She had learned over these terrible months to distinguish between different types of knocks, to read thread levels in rhythm and intensity. This was the dangerous kind, the kind that preceded bad news, or worse intentions. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she moved toward the door. Every instinct screaming danger, warning her to hide, to pretend no one was home. But hiding had never worked. Debt didn't disappear because you ignored doors. She opened it slowly, prepared for collectors or sheriffs or some other representative of systems that wanted something from her she could unprovide. A man stood there, not a collector this time. Not anyone she recognized from previous encounters. Someone unexpected. Someone different. He spoke softly, his voice lacking the hard edge she'd grown accustomed to hearing. He asked if she was Naomi Carter, pronouncing her name correctly, respectfully. Asked if she needed help. The question so simple, yet so loaded with potential and risk. Naomi didn't trust kindness anymore, not after so many disappointments. Not without visible scars, to prove it had cost someone something. Free help always came with hidden prices, with strings attached that strangled you slowly. But something in his eyes stopped her from slamming the door in his face and retreating back into protective isolation. Not pity, which she had learned to hate. Recognition. as if he saw her as a person rather than a problem, as if he understood struggle from the inside rather than observing it from a comfortable distance. He told her about a night program she'd never heard of, one that operated outside the normal bureaucratic channels, temporary work that paid cash, nothing traced, nothing requiring documentation she didn't have, cash paid daily at the end of each shift, not in 2 weeks when it would be too late, nothing glamorous or career building, nothing easy or comfortable, cleaning office buildings after hours, hard physical labor that would leave her exhausted, but real, legitimate, immediate. Naomi looked back at her children, still frozen near the blankets, watching this interaction with wide, uncertain eyes, at their hollow cheeks that had lost the roundness of healthy childhood, at their tired eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, at their thin bodies that were slowly consuming themselves. And in that single moment, she understood something powerful, something that would carry her forward. Survival is not weakness or failure or something to be ashamed of. It is rebellion against a world that expects you to break. It is resistance against systems designed to crush you. It is a revolution in its most personal, most fundamental form. She accepted his offer without hesitation, without negotiation, without pride getting in the way of necessity. That night, after her first shift, cleaning offices and buildings where people made in 1 hour what she needed for a month, she came home with cash in her pocket. Not much. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to buy food. Real food. Enough food. As her boys finally slept with full stomachs for the first time in days, really slept deeply and peacefully without the restless tossing of hunger, Naomi sat alone in the darkness of their nearly empty apartment, exhausted beyond anything she'd known before, afraid of how long she could maintain this pace, but still breathing, still functioning, still providing, still fighting against every force trying to destroy her family, still standing when the world expected her to fall. The city outside a cracked window didn't know her name, couldn't see her struggle, wouldn't remember her story. But it would. Somehow, someday, it would. Soon she'd make sure of it. If Naomi's struggle touched your heart, if you've ever known hunger or watched someone you love go without, show your support. Like this video to help her story reach others who need to know they're not alone. Comment below, share your thoughts, your own story, or words of encouragement. Share this with someone who needs to see that survival is strength, not weakness, because Naomi's hardest battles are still coming, and she's going to need all of us standing with her. Episode 6. Drop soon. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Together, we rise.